Here's something that should bother you. 2 shoppers visit your site. One looks at a $30 product, the other one looks at a $200 product. They both abandon, and most brands will send them the exact same email, which is insane. Instant fixes this. It watches what each shopper does on your site and builds the perfect follow-up around their behavior. The right product, the right message, the right offer, and the right timing. And for the operators who care about incrementality, this is the part that matters. Instant now lets you measure performance on the same attribution window you're already using inside Klaviyo. So if your team lives by a one-day click, you can see exactly what Instant is adding up on a one-day click view. And believe me, when you see how much revenue your standard email setup is still leaving untouched, you're gonna want Instant live today. Over 1,500 brands are live, including Third Love, Liquid IV, and Kind Patches. And this month only, you can get 50% off your first 60 days at instant.one/Sharma. Welcome back to another episode of Limited Supply. All right, today's episode is with Joseph. I met him when I was working with Feastables. And Joseph was kind of the head of retention over at Feastables, which is, Mr. Beast's multi-$100 million chocolate brand. Absolutely killing it, both digitally and in retail. Anyways, I met Joseph there, and today he works with a variety of brands, specifically a lot of the fast-scaling supplement performance marketing brands. And, those are a lot of times the brands that I like to go and look at as inspiration. I tend to find that those guys are, it's usually like Vice Industries do something first, and then it gets to the underground drop shippers and app builders. And then it slowly gets its way to supplement brands that are, good brands. And then it makes its way to kind of the general e-commerce world. So we were talking about a lot of things that, have for a long time been tested in the kind of underground world, but it's always just been done in a way that was shady before. So, now you're talking about brands with massive celebrities, or just brands that are huge. And so they have a lot more things when it comes to compliance and what they're able to do and kind of where the guardrails are. So the reason I got Joseph on in the first place was I was just excited to chat with him and go deep on what he's doing from a retention standpoint. He's not just overlooking email and SMS, but he's thinking about subscription and how do you acquire customers that have the highest lifetime value from the get-go, and what kind of offer are you getting them in so that you maximize the lifetime value based on what they first get. So all those kinds of things. We went high level, we went super deep in the weeds, and overall it was just it was super informative. I put one newsletter out already from the podcast. I'll probably put 1 or 2 more out. There's just a bunch of nuggets in here. So if you don't want to miss out on at least 3 to 4 nuggets you'll be able to walk away with on the retention side of your business, then I highly recommend you just keep listening to this episode. Anyways, give it a listen. Let me know what you think. Feel free to reach out to Joseph himself on Twitter. He's super responsive. Reach out to me on Twitter at Mr. Sharma. And I'll see you next week. All right, Joseph, welcome to Limited Supply. I'm absolutely stoked to have you here. There's not a lot of retention experts that I know in the industry, and you're one of the greatest. So I'm excited to have you here and talk retention, because we don't really talk much retention stuff here. It's obviously a part of it, but I've always been on the growth side and the acquisition side of things. But yeah, I'm really excited to talk through a bunch of stuff today. Before we jump into it, give us a bragging intro of yourself. How would you brag about yourself, not just introduce yourself?
So I don't really like talking about myself too much, but I'll give this a try.
I know.
So my last full-time role was at Feastables. I was one of the first hires there on the ecom side. They brought me in as head of retention and stayed as head of retention for about a year before getting promoted to director of ecom growth and retention. Stayed in that new role for about a year as well before leaving to kind of start this fractional retention business, where I got a chance to work with the biggest mushroom coffee company in the world, sign an NDA so I can't share their name. And then kind of, one thing led to the next, and got the opportunity to do the same for instant hydration. And now most recently, iMate. So coming in, building retention systems from the ground up, bringing that retention leadership. And, again, when we speak about retention, it's not like email marketing, right? I mean, I think that's like certainly a lever, but, expands a lot more beyond that at this point.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk more about like what you feel retention is. I've always said that, I guess, different point of view, but I've always said that retention, if good retention is done, your brand is a top 5 thought in somebody's mind, or it might be something that gets brought up at the dinner table. But it's got to always be stuff that, contributes to something that's it's got to be a program design that's good enough that people remember it later,
100%. I mean, I
essentially.
feel like we're seeing that like with Grun's, right? Like Grun's in their exit. I mean, of course they've had an insane growth story, but they don't get that type of growth without like the retention and like the LTV plays that they've made on the back end. Just like building a memorable
Totally.
brand, having the mind share. I know that's something you've talked about before. So yeah, I could not agree with more.
Yeah. Like, what do you feel like falls under the category of
Yeah.
retention?
So, I mean, I think it's different based on the category or brand, right? So the retention that I focus on, is mostly in the supplement space. And, for a supplement brand, again, just going back to email, a lot of the campaigns you would send, right, are typically going to be sent to a prospect list or a non-customer group, or maybe one-time purchase customers. But I think we all know, like in the space, is like the more you email your active subscribers, the more churn you're probably going to drive. So it's not to say you should never email them. Of course, it's just like being strategic about what kind of messages you want to send to them, what kind of value you want to add to like that customer journey. So I'll look at email as a retention tool in the context of like win back flows, right? Optimizing your upcoming order flow. The upcoming order flow is a huge driver for churn, but it can also be a huge driver for retention if you kind of flip the script. Where, when people get an upcoming order email, most emails are like super transactional, and they're like, you have an order coming in 3 days, you're going to get charged $200, whatever it might be. And that's not something that too many people are going to read and be excited about. So we try to like flip that script and make it something that like your next level of benefits are going to unlock in the next 30, 60, 90 days, whatever it might be. So we'll spend a lot of time there. And then, of course, in the subscriber portal, there's huge opportunity for driving retention by just loading up the portal with content around, again, like benefit messaging, and making it easy for customers to manage the subscription without being too shady. So we spend a lot of time on cancel flows, a lot of time on like, the first kind of 14 days, first 30 days of onboarding. Your transactional emails, specifically like the shipping emails, like order confirmed, order shipped, orders on the move, order delivered. Those are like some of your highest open emails, right? Of probably like any account. A lot of brands will have those emails like still within Shopify, which is like a huge mistake because you can't really see the data. You can't really like change the design too much on those. So we'll, bring those into Klaviyo and then like really overhaul them to make them again not transactional. We want to make them like moments of like, customer opens the email and then now they're more excited to explore the brand. I think a great example of this is if you go place an order from Rise Superfoods, you'll see that you're instantly met with value, right? One of the first emails you get is, I think it's like a surprise and delight message. One of them, it's like you have a free gift coming on your next order that that we picked you to receive. Like that type of thing drives retention. They also give you like access to a free call with a nutritionist or something like that, or like a dietitian. I don't know, something like that. That again, it's like as a customer, it's like you're gonna love the brand that much more. You're gonna remember them that much more because of that. They give you a free class pass membership for like a month, right? So it's like these are retention levers that you can pull by kind of again overhauling the onboarding experience. And then also again, maybe I'm just rambling, Nick, but
No,
product
this is
product
amazing. I have so
inserts. I
much to
feel
go from
like
from this.
again, I kind of post about this on LinkedIn. A lot of brands will kind of just treat like a product insert as like something that it's more of like a throw in, right? It's like, oh, we just kind of know we should be doing
Mhm.
that as a brand, and we're just going to write something nice from the founder to the customer and kind of like hope that like moves the needle. But in most cases, there's like actually zero tracking and zero kind of like testing or accountability with that channel, and it is most certainly an area that a lot of brands really should focus on. Think of brands like Ultra, right? So like when you place an order from Ultra, you're getting met with an insert that's like there's different levels to Ultra. Like if you want to feel Ultra more, you should probably take like 2 pouches, or if you really want like the maximum effect, you want to take 3 pouches, right? And there's another brand like Alice Mushrooms that I posted about. Like they sell like these like I don't know aphrodisiac chocolates, and same kind of thing. It's like you could take one a day consistently to just increase your libido. But if you want that extra boost and maybe you want to have like a good night, whatever it might be, you take an extra one for that day. So again, it's like you want to use the
Right.
insert as like that moment that, the customer is going to read it every single time. And so like what kind of content can we throw onto this that is going to drive the needle for retention? There's actually so much more I could go into, but I don't want to over I don't want to hijack your podcast here.
Well, before we jump to some other stuff on that, like, so when you're talking about the product insert, right? Are you saying that it's better to use it from like an educational standpoint, or are you saying like actually what you put there should tie toward the product outcome, like the emotional outcome? So in that example, having a good night, you're tying that to that versus talking about, what are the ingredients in the thing? Is that
Yeah,
what you're
exactly.
saying?
I mean, I feel like a combination of both would be great, right? Like ideally you are double downing and maybe like, further educating the customer on like the specific ingredients that might be part of your formula that, again, might be moving the needle for these specific benefits. But at the same time, yes, just like painting that picture, framing, for the customer, like what you might feel down the line is like to me the most important part of all of this of like how do we help the customer
Yeah.
use the product better, because in a lot of cases there's just like basic level product education that a lot of customers don't know how to, they don't know the importance of like daily consistency, right? So it's like you want to reinforce the daily use of the product and then show how like maybe you have some kind of trials or studies that you've done, whether it's like clinical or just like through consumer studies that show over 12 weeks of taking the product daily, users found X, Y, and Z benefits, right? So now as a customer, when I open it on my first order, I'm like, oh, okay, so this is the exact like output. These are the exact like benefit that I'm looking to get. And, they're just telling me, they're just giving me the blueprint, right, of how to actually achieve that. And so I think there's that. And then there's now also another lever of all of this that is like purely retention play, where if you go order from Marsmen, I think Marsmen has honestly one of the best product inserts I've ever seen. They also have given you I don't know if it's like a 30, 60, 90-day habit tracker that's physical, of course. And then, of course, they want you to fill out the habit tracker. But what's actually really cool is there's a message at the end of it that they essentially prompt you to take a photo, like a screenshot after 90 days when you've completed all the daily check marks, and then submit it, and you will get a free month of Marsmen for doing that, right? But I
Nice.
assume they're not going to give you that unless you've actually completed 3 months worth of orders, right? So it's almost like
Right.
pre-baking in the retention. If you really want a free month, you want to get all this value, you got to stick with us, right? And try the product. And of course, that's how you
Right.
drive, consistent usage, which is everything.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. Yeah, even just in that, what you kind of talked about was you went over basically product inserts, the those 4 emails post purchase between like, placing the order and the order basically being unboxed. You talked about the inserts. How important do you also think like the actual packaging, branded tape, the unboxing, the feel of the box, all those things? How important do you think that is compared to, for example, like there's so many times I'll talk to brands, they're like, no, we'll just put it in a mailer. We already got the purchase.
Totally. Yeah. And I would say like one of the best examples of packaging that I've really liked is IM8, which is one of the clients that we work with. And if you've ever ordered IM8, it's just truly an incredible unboxing experience that, I think it's, you know, I guess there's like different lenses to approach this from, right? Where it's like, if I'm looking at this from a retention lens, I do, of course, believe that a better unboxing experience is going to lead to higher retention just because it creates a more memorable brand, which goes back to the point we were talking to at the start of this podcast, where it's like, you open the iMate box and there's like this really cool there's like a pack of cards, and like every card has like a different sort of like education piece to the brand that, I think is obviously great for the customer to know. And there's like a really like powerful mission statement like behind that, like on the actual like box, the inner flap. And so I think it's like when you can create unforgettable moments like this, obviously gonna just, help drive the connection to the brand. But, it's not something I can say we've ever like A/B tested, right? So it's like hard to put data behind like stronger retention with better unboxing experiences. But even if like you don't want to go as far as like a crazy nice, box, yes, a branded mailer could go a long way. And I will just add from the perspective of like growth marketing or just like guerrilla marketing. I live in an apartment building. When I go to, get my packages downstairs, it's almost like free advertising when you have a really sick mailer or box.
Yeah, I think about that all the time, especially just around the
Totally.
city, seeing UPS and FedEx moving, dollies full of boxes. You always see Eat Sleep or Chewy or HelloFresh, and you see it, and it's like
It's
it's a
literally a
billboard.
billboard. So it's like whatever the incremental cost is of doing that, it feels like, it has to be worth it if you can make a really cool branded, box or mailer. So yeah.
Totally agreed. The other thing you mentioned was gifts, and specifically also gifts on a delay, which I think is really smart, both in the Rise and the Marsmen examples. How do you how do you advise brands to choose their gifts? Like, for example, I always find it a fun little exercise to do, and back when I worked at Hint, that was one thing that I learned from Hint because the founder came from a direct marketing background, like American Express and like those types of companies. And so they used to always do gifts with purchase, which would crush for promotions. Like promotional gifts with purchase with no extra discount goes such a long way. But it's always hard to find unique things that are unique to the brand versus things that just feel like, oh, they just went to Alibaba and got something to throw in
Yeah,
there.
I mean, sure, it's definitely. I feel like it comes up with every engagement we work on now, and the brand's like, what kind of gifts make the most sense? We just launched a gifting program for IM8 in the last few months, and seeing nice success from that. But I think again, it kind of all comes down to like the intention of like why you want to throw these gifts in, right? Is it to kind of fool the customer into thinking they're going to get something nice and then they don't, right? Because that could totally backfire if you just have like a cheap throw in, right?
Totally.
And you market this cool big gift or mystery gift, whatever it might be, and it's like a something that clearly is worth a few dollars that they're never going to use. And so I think from the perspective of gifts, it's like what is additive to the customer experience based on the product they actually purchased, right? So a brand that you and I both love, Gray Matter, right? We've talked about this brand quite a bit.
Hmm.
We both do some work with them. Gray Matter is truly one of the best products I've ever tried in my entire life. Not the point, or that's besides the point. But in their case, they'll give you a frother, and then the next month, or maybe in future months, you'll get a shaker bottle. And these may sound like potentially basic gifts, but to be honest with you, if you just put that product into a glass of water and try mixing it with a spoon, you're going to get some clumping. You're going to get, it's not going to be the cleanest kind of product experience. That's not just the case for them. Obviously, it's probably the wider kind of
Yeah, most
exactly
powdered
right.
things,
So in their case,
especially cold water.
exactly right, especially in cold water, which most people are not going to know about.
Know the
Exactly.
difference.
So
Yeah.
for them, the shaker bottle, like 10 times out of 10, you shake it in that thing, it's fucking perfect, And so
Yeah.
it's obviously conducive to a better customer experience. I would say like if you're going to think about gifts, you know, uh, from the margin perspective, you don't want to exceed something that's more than like definitely no more than 10% of your like gross margin, because then you all have to like obviously see like an equal lift on retention if you're going to use these gifts as like retention play to kind of justify the added costs. Otherwise, it's actually more of like a detrimental gift than a gift driving retention for us. But as long as it's like sub
Totally.
5% COGS and it's an additive product like that, you're doing something right. Yeah.
Yeah. I've always been such a big proponent of like building out a real offer that's, a deal on the product. The brand gets something. A lot of times now that's basically the subscription piece of it. And then, the customer gets basically the arbitrage perceived value of the gift. Buy the tumbler for $1.09 and value it at $19 or something. And then one thing I also did at Hint that everybody thought was silly, but I thought this is kind of a no brainer was 3 months of ClassPass, because I figured that's basically like $45 of value or whatever it was times three, maybe $90 of value for ClassPass. They're basically spending money on acquisition. So if I can give them a customer the cogs of those 3 months, whatever their hard cost is basically their customer acquisition cost. So why wouldn't they do that? And we did it with Postmates as well, and it crushed because the probably for the same reason still working today. And today I see it with like Com and
Mm-hmm.
Othership,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the other kind of like more
Mm-hmm.
calming apps. But I wouldn't be surprised if brands also just start coming out with their own versions of fully digitally native
Oh
apps as
man,
well.
I could not agree more. I feel like the tech savvy brands out there, with all the access to AI now, right? Like, a calm partnership is going to cost you, quite a bit of money, right? And so like if you can't.
Yeah, because now they're like the celebrity in that
Exactly.
engagement as well.
Exactly. Totally. So if you want to like, do this on a budget, you can create your own version of this by, cooking something up with, some kind of AI tool. Like, I mean, Nick, you're the AI guy here. So, I mean, you could probably talk about that, but
Yeah, yeah, I'm all in right now. I was gonna say, what are some of the AI tools you're using?
Claude Code, Manus, those are the two, honestly, that I use the most. I
Yeah.
haven't gone like deep into like vibe coding, like true software or anything like that yet. But from the perspective of like, saving time by replicating or like building skills with, again, Manus or Claude Code, and then using the skill to replicate the output across different instances of like the same exact, use case, like that to me is like a fucking no brainer.
Hmm.
And then obviously Manus would like, if you ever want to mock something up, whether it's a fucking, even like an insert, or an email or, a landing page, like Manus is insane. And like, that's my go-to for that. But yeah, what about you? What have you been using?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of Manus. I've got behind me 4 Mac Minis that are all set up as open claw systems. So, everything from building websites from like, the doc I shared with you, our prep doc, all the way to, I made a app that is roast.nick.co is the domain. And you basically Apple Pay $5 and you put your website in and you get the same level of like a $5,000 agency
No
audit for
way.
your site. So been building fun things like that. But also I was at dinner with Cody from Jones Road this week. And we were just talking about some of the different things and, even building systems where you are like, he's doing a lot of stuff with
Hmm.
CRO. So like he's got a system where he's plugging in, he got the API from Heatmap, which has been installed on his site for a couple of years. So it has all the data just sitting there, right? Then he's got his ad performance. So it has that context. It's got probably his email stuff. So it has that context from like copy creative standpoint. And then he plugs in outer signal. He can get all of his customer personas and start really building personas there. And then he can have an engine that knows every test he's ever run on the site. And he's basically, coming up with a new CRO test. And he's 3 for
Wow.
3 right now doing this, which is crazy. But I just thought it's so sick. Like, that's a really cool way to, you're not just using one thing. You're kind of like taking, all right, outer signal API, heat map API, Manus or not Manus, but Meta API, and you kind of put it all together. And then he's even deploying it just using the regular like Shopify
Yeah, I
API.
mean, clearly that's like the way to go. It just, it takes like the time commitment, but like if you can put in the time, it's going to
Totally.
save you so much time down the road. Um, and like he's
Yeah,
just doing that for
100%.
CRO, but like you could literally do that across any function, you know? So
100%. Have you come across generative emails a lot?
you mean like with certain platforms or just in general?
Yeah, in general, both.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've seen some. I mean, I've seen some pop up on Twitter, and I mean, like, I won't even call out any names. I haven't seen any that like blew me away, but I would say
Yeah.
like the way that we're using it across some brands is, or brands that are like far more AI forward. We're using like Claude Code to kind of like we're using it as like a kind of like a first step for like mocking up all of our emails so that we can like build like the skeleton structure, and then just like pass that off to designers and like the copywriters, and then they just like fill in the gaps. The time it takes now to create emails is like, you know not even anywhere close to where it used to be, and like you could batch create 50 emails within like 30 minutes now. That are super solid emails going, like we're literally sending these out to huge lists and they're performing well. I would say like from that perspective, it's definitely improving a lot, but like a one shot, like click of a button and then just generating a perfect email for any brand. I haven't seen it. But I'm super excited for
Yeah.
that day when it comes.
Yeah. I feel like it's coming soon. Okay. I want to talk about what you think are the most important flows a brand can have, especially going into, a life cycle where they're trying to have high retention. So consumable products or supplements. Where do you feel are the most important flows that a brand needs to have to launch? And then where should they try to get to? And then I also want to talk about like how you think about campaigns that are not just kind of, just
Yeah,
fluff,
for
basically.
sure. So, most people will probably give the answer of like the welcome series, just 'cause like, of course,
Hmm.
that's like what gets people in. But in most cases, only like one or two emails as part of the welcome series will ever convert a customer. And, after that, it's like, it's kind of tough. So as far as like on the retention end, the first thing is kind of like what we were talking about earlier, right? Where it's like the transactional shipping emails are such an unbelievably overlooked component to the email program that it's not a basic template in Klaviyo. Like you wouldn't even know to create it. You have to like use maybe like a Wonderment or a Malomo, to kind of ingest a lot of those properties from Shopify over to Klaviyo. But like those are hugely important for retention because again, on the retention side, like it's our goal to, of course, educate, but also prime the customer to be, you know, to be excited about staying with the brand, to know like why the product's going to work for them. And so like we use these emails now, like we'll like push down a lot of the transactional content, like the shipping and like order details towards the bottom of these emails now. Um, and we'll like front load them with like your journey over 12 weeks. And also like for some brands maybe there's like a difference in like intensity of flavor or like effects that you might experience by using the product at different dosages or whatever, or like different mixtures of like maybe water content. So we'll kind of like load up that educational content so that the very minute they actually receive their product, it gets delivered, they know so much about the product. They know so much about like what's ahead for them that, it wouldn't even matter if we sent them another email as part of like the post-purchase onboarding flow. Like they would already know like what to expect, what to look for, and what to stay for, I guess, for that matter. So those are super important. And then of course, something we're also exploring right now is like master classes. And what that like tactically means is like as a customer who kind of subscribes or like starts their journey with the brand, we'll set up a really interactive onboarding flow or experience that we're doing in Typeform, that we're linking out to from like post-purchase onboarding emails, that basically is like a nice way, because like if you think about an email, right, not everybody's going to open the email, and then not everybody's going to even read half the email. They probably just read like the hero section. So how much can you really fill up in that email? It's like there's not a lot to work with, right? And so we'll link out to this Typeform experience where it's like you're just you're keeping the user engaged by having them click buttons to get through to the next page to learn more and more and more about the brand, to understand the brand pillars, and happy to even like plug in some Typeform like master classes into the show notes for people to get a look. And then I guess like after that experience of, of course, like I said, upcoming order emails like wildly important, for kind of what I said earlier. You don't want to make it transactional. You also want to segment that flow, which a lot of brands don't do, by order cycle, so that you can, control the content that people would experience and like get from month one to month two, and month two to month three to month four, and so on. Because again, like the different benefits that one might experience month one and month two might be different, and we don't want to treat everybody the same there. Um, we also, of course, on the win back side, something we're exploring is, most brands will probably just have like a generic 30-day win back flow and whatnot. Again, I'm just going to focus most of this on subscription related win backs because that's like where we spend most of our time. We are analyzing like what makes up like a top 10 or 20% customer. And then we are creating like a more structured like VIP flow for those customers that, like, if you really think about it logically, like why would your best customers go down the most generic like win back experience, right? Because it's not really going to save them as well as it probably could have if you like specifically address the customer as like, hey Nick, I know you've been with us for the last 4 months. You've been one of our best customers, you're out in LA, blah blah blah. And we just want a chance to like chat with you and figure out what went wrong. So then you're setting up like maybe a customer interview or leading to another survey. We just want to like learn more and connect with those customers before selling them again into something else, which I think is like a really strong way to approach winbacks. But yeah, I would say like if you want to like narrow it down to the most important flows, those are the ones that I would focus on, primarily on the retention side.
Time for the retention tip of the week, brought to you by Instant. If you're a founder and you haven't personally audited your post purchase experience in the last 90 days, do it this week. I'm serious. Place an order on your own site, pay attention to every single touch point for 48 hours. Here's why. The first 48 hours after someone buys something are the highest attention window you'll ever get, ever. They're excited. They're checking their emails for shipping confirmation. They're looking up your brand on social. And most brands completely waste this window with a boring transactional Shopify email and radio silence until the package arrives. The best operators I've seen use that 48-hour window to do three things. One, reinforce the purchase decision and tell them why what they bought is great. Second, set expectations. When it's arriving, how do you use it? What should they expect? Third, introduce the brand world. Your story, your community, your other products. This isn't about selling more right now. It's about making them feel like they just joined something, not just bought something. Instant can help you build all these kinds of personalized post-purchase flows that run on autopilot. Their AI generates emails based on what each customer actually bought and what they browsed. Head to instant.one/Sharma to learn more. I'm curious, like where when you do these customer interviews, where do you store and how do you store a lot of that
Yeah,
information?
we record everything, right? And it's of course like consensual, right? Like
Of
we'll
course, yeah.
first actually qualify them through like a mini survey. So we'll send out an email and have them fill out a few questions, make sure that they're the right kind of candidate to interview, make sure they're opting into being recorded. Most are totally fine with it. And it's actually cool. You'll find that like when you interview customers, especially customers that really like the brand, even if they canceled, a lot of them just like want more product, like, or they just want more kind of like gifts from the brand rather than like money, which is kind of funny because like we'll offer like 25, 30, $50 sometimes to get on these calls. And they're just like, no, we just want more product. It's kind of cool. But anyway, we're saving all those transcripts with an Otter AI or one of these other kind of note takers. And yeah,
Fireflies or
Fireflies. I
something.
think
Yeah.
Firefly is actually the best, truthfully, because it has an MCP. Yeah,
Same.
it just directly integrates with Claude.
Yeah,
Um, and then what we'll do
exactly.
is we'll match back the interview transcripts with what we're also finding in Outer Signal. And then we'll also throw in another layer of like customer reviews. And now you have like a really intelligent like data layer of like all this different customer info that's kind of plugged into one system. And then you can kind of create these like really strong ICP segments out of these. And by using or like by like understanding your ICPs, you can have more targeted like ads, more targeted landing pages, more targeted emails, more targeted post
Totally.
purchase onboarding. Like, I mean, the list goes on, and we're just seeing direct lifts in how that's like helping. So, yeah.
Wow, dude, that's so cool. You think of a lot of things that I would never think of when it comes to like running a retention program. What are some interesting insights you found through customer interviews that maybe like changed the game for, like have you ever found insights that, you implement something from that and it just totally changes
It's
the
a good
game?
question, honestly. I mean, a lot of times, like again, people are canceling like not because they didn't like the product, but maybe they just like had way too much product. And we found that like some of the people we'd interview were literally just like kind of playing like a Santa role, just like literally dishing out all this product to their friends and family. And so like on our end, we see somebody canceling, we're like, oh man, like something must have went wrong. Of course, nothing really went wrong, but it's
Yeah,
like you can learn more about like the consumption patterns and like what customers really do care about. Because like I said again, like for a strong customer, usually they just want more product. It's hard to say like that we've implemented something that's like been a game changer. Like right now, we just kind of did this first experiment with one brand in the last like 1 or 2 months. So we're still kind of like piecing together the kind of fall throughs. But again, like the biggest fall through or like the biggest kind of learning from that experience was just like truly getting an understanding of the customer like ICPs. And by knowing the ICPs, we know exactly. Here's one thing actually. We've extracted quotes from those kind of like interviews, and now we're using those quotes across ads, across the website, across emails, because now we know like how these kind of customers talk, right? So now you can like
hmm
put the brand in the same state of mind, or like you could basically like connect with the customer a lot easier once you're speaking their language. So that is something directly we're doing right now. But more than anything, I mean, I think like if you can scale something like this of like interviewing enough customers, like it's just going to create more connection with the brand. But then again, like just more pattern
totally.
recognition of like what kind of customers you really want to bring in.
Yeah, 100%. I don't know if you've seen how much the new like voice models
Yeah,
have
it's
also
crazy.
gotten or how good they've
Totally.
gotten. But like OpenAI just released a voice model that can basically hold a conversation and
Yeah.
respond instantly with emotion and like tone of voice and everything. It's nuts.
The crazy thing is like I don't think customers will care that it's AI at a certain point, you
No,
know?
not at all. Especially not if they're going to get something at
Exactly.
the end,
Exactly.
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then before we jump to the next thing, I'm curious, what are the like how do you think about campaigns? So like, I used to always but last time I did email properly personally was when I was at Hint, and we had this massive Excel sheet as a
Yep.
campaign calendar, and it had social, organic social, paid social, email, website, you know any sort of like field marketing, PR stuff, and that's where we basically centered all of our like moments, and then emails were basically built off the back of that. But curious how you think about approaching campaigns and then coming up with like what is the content, how do we make sure it's relevant versus just sending
For
slop,
sure.
you know?
So I'll preface by saying we don't manage campaigns for clients right now, but we will, however, help drive kind of like the top level strategy for what we're looking for. In working with some of these brands, like some of the brands like Instant Hydration and some others that I mentioned, we've done some analysis to find that there is like an actual correlation between sending out emails, like sending out email campaigns to non customers, and then driving down CAC. So I think a lot of brands will they won't actually piece together the days that they send these campaigns out to their kind of like broader like non-customer list. And they're all kind of like in silo. Like you have Facebook here, maybe you have Northbeam, and like Northbeam shows a blended CAC, but like what we would want to do is put it all into a Google sheet and be like, here's all the campaigns we sent last month. And then here's like the CAC on that specific day of the week, or just like literally by day, what was CAC. And then we pulled this now across a variety of brands. And almost in any case, the days that we do send out a campaign, we'll see roughly a 10 to 11% drop in CAC on those days. That's not maybe like, I mean, take that as like anecdotal data. Like that may not be the same for anybody listening to this show, but it's definitely interesting, right? And so then again, or then of course, that kind of like presents a case for like increasing volume, right? So it's like if you do this, run this analysis, and you find that you actually have lower CAC on these like campaign days, then it's like, okay, which days of the week actually have the most kind of impact on that CAC number? How like much substantial data do you have here? Is it like just in a 1 week cohort? Is it a month? Is it several months? When I do this, we're looking back like 90 days at least, right? To really put together these patterns to make sure that like what we're presenting here is true. But then again, like I said, it's just like a
Hmm.
volume game. So it's like then we're working with the email team to figure out like, how do we get out more emails without it being, destructive to the customer experience or like driving spam. We don't want to drive more unsubscribes, all of that. And that can be handled. There is definitely a balance for everybody. But I'd say like that's one of the biggest learnings we found for sure on the campaign side. And then also just like being accountable to specific like top level KPIs and metrics on the email side, such as like orders by new customers, orders by returning customers, driven from email, right? So we're actually setting goals, right? Of like, here's how many email attributed orders we need this month to reach our target for, recurring orders driven from email for that month, because it all ladders up, of course. And so I think like adding accountability there, where it's not just accountability of like revenue in a dashboard, because like we all know at this point, like it's
Hmm.
just attribution. So you're never really going to get the best data there. But if you have something like a triple whale or ideally like a Northbeam, then it's really easy like to see which platforms are driving those sales, and setting like true goals and targets based on like the true kind of historical data.
Do you have some brands that don't even send any campaigns? They just do
The
flows?
best brands will send campaigns. So we do. I mean, we certainly have
Yeah.
some that are like more resistant because it's like, I don't know. I mean, it's usually a bandwidth function or a function of like not having a good email team. But I would say like if you really want to do it right, uh, you got to be sending out campaigns again, at least to your non-customers, because you're just truly like holding yourself back and you're creating like a large dormant list if you don't email them.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
Do you advise any suppression for subscribers
Certainly, like
then?
I said, so like the majority of the weekly campaigns would not go to these subscribers, right? To the active
Got
subscribers.
it. Okay,
In
I
most
missed that.
cases, we advise like only a handful of emails per month to ever send to these kind of people because it's like, again, what is really going to be additive if you think about it logically? Like, if you're a brand that has one hero SKU and maybe some supporting SKUs, and you email the customer to go shop again, well, they already have product in hand right now. So it's like you're just going to potentially get an advance on the LTV, but at the expense of potentially like worse retention because now they're going to have too much product. They're probably going to go churn, right? So yeah, no, we want to be careful there.
Yeah. So, okay, so I'm curious now. I want to talk metrics. I actually don't know what are the metrics to focus on, like when you're thinking about retention
Yep.
program as a whole, right? Because like open rate has gotten skewed. I don't know if click rate is ever accurate. Like I know some of the metrics got funky, basically. So I'm curious, like what are the metrics to focus on, and then I'm also just curious, how do you not land in the promo
Yeah.
tab? Because that's what
Good
everybody's
question.
fear is.
So I'll give you an answer again that's not like an email related answer because like we don't really spend a lot of time like reporting on email stuff. The metrics that we look at from a retention perspective are true order retention. So if you go ask like 10 founders what their retention is, a lot of them or some number of them will probably tell you their subscriber retention, meaning like for their active subscription customers, what percent of them are still active at the end of every month. And a lot of brands don't know that there's actually distinction between subscriber retention and order retention by subscriber, right? So first things first is educating, you or any or the brand is like order retention is the North Star metric that we're shooting for. Ideally, looking at that on like a monthly kind of like level where it's like what percent of your customers who ordered, in this month are going to be ordering next month. That's like wildly important as it relates to like your payback period, right? So that's like the North Star for us. And then secondly is like LTV, of course. So like how does LTV change with the order retention improvement or the deltas there? 30, 60, 90, 120 day, three, full year LTVs. A lot of brands or a lot of investors care about 12-month and 24-month retention rates as like it's obviously a really strong indicator you have a good product and a good brand. And I think a lot of brands kind of neglect the longer term retention lens of all of this stuff. And they're maybe like more short sighted of like, how do I force people into a second order with no rebill email? It's like you're probably going
Yeah,
to help recover some of that CAC faster, but like at the expense of like, really destroying your customer relationship, for the long term. So we're looking at those primarily. And then we're also looking at churn rate based on like active churn and passive churn, right? Which if you stay SKU or recharge, you could find this kind of data in all of those kind of platforms. Cause like obviously, the more you can drive down the churn rate, of course, in theory, then like the more you should increase your retention. Then we're also looking at churn rate by order cycle because typically the lower the order cycle, meaning like if you're on order one approaching order two, you're gonna have a lot higher churn rate, right? In most cases, brands maybe have like 50% retention month one or 40%, or if they're really good, 60 or 70 or 80%. But as they mature, reach like month four, month five, the attrition rate really, really drops, really, really levels out. You're seeing sub 10% attrition month over month. Those people, obviously have a lot lower churn rate, so you don't need to focus on them as much. But yeah, for any kind of newer brand listening to this, your churn rate might be higher if you have like a smaller, group of like active subscription customers. That's just kind of how it goes. And like the bigger your list, the lower your active churn is probably going to go. So we're looking at that. We're looking at pause rate, skip rate, save rate across the cancel prevention flow, right? Because like effectively, the more you can drive up that save rate, the more you're saving a customer from canceling. Even if they go to actually skip from that flow instead of cancel, we're still finding that there's not perfect retention for those skippers. But even if like 60% of them go on to place another order instead of canceling at that prior moment, it's still going to be a win. So yeah,
yeah,
those are like the metrics we're looking at mostly. And then in Klaviyo, I don't really look at it as much, honestly. Open rate they're all like becoming sort of vanity metrics, but ideally you have like a strong ish click rate of like at least 0.5 to 1%. A lot of brands are skewing lower now these days. Not entirely sure why, but as far or probably because a lot of the bots they're like picking up now. And how to like
yeah,
skip the primary or skip the promotion, enter the primary. You just want to use a platform. There's one called Maverick that we use that I really like. There's another one called like Mailmend, but there's like tools now out there that essentially what they do is they install like a text script at the very bottom or at the very top of your email that to the customer's eyes, they could never see any of this. But it essentially like tricks the inbox provider into thinking that it's like a privacy policy update email, that it's like very transactional. And
Oh,
so, because like they're reading the HTML version of the email, right? So like it's just like
right.
a script full of text that's all about that type of thing. They're going to think, oh, this needs to be in the primary tab. you know?
Yeah. Wow,
Yeah, it's
that's
pretty crazy.
genius. Um, all right. So if I'm a brand and, I've like had this brand for a while, maybe 4 or 5 years, it's not like a hyper growth thing, but it's been growing slow and steady. I've got some subscribers, maybe a couple thousand subscribers, but I feel like my retention program's just dead. But I've got all these emails, and I have like some subscribers left. We're still running a little bit of Facebook ads. Like, what do you recommend? How do I don't have really a pop up thing going. I don't have any good, camp flows, or I don't have like I don't have anything that I'm pushing out to subscribers. Like, how do you recommend I would re-energize this?
I mean, that's a tough situation. So is the brand still growing or has it just been kind of like, you know,
Still growing, but like, mostly
mostly flat?
flat, like maybe 5-10%.
Okay.
Very
And then they
small.
have like is a decent like subscriber base. You're talking about like email subscribers.
Yeah, maybe like 40, yeah, 40,000 subs in
Okay.
total, or basically
Okay.
40,000 emails. And maybe like 1,000 active
Yeah. I
subs.
mean, there's not a lot of work with there, truthfully, because like 40,000 emails subscribers is not a lot in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
Ideally, you don't end up in that situation where you're not emailing those people for a while.
Yeah. How do you prevent from becoming like a having a zombie
I
CRM
mean, it just comes
basically?
down to like having bandwidth ultimately, I think is like the biggest thing. So it's like if you see that you are losing bandwidth or the team that you're working with is not good and you're not getting the data you want, like you don't want to mess around with this stuff because like the longer you put it off, the harder it's going to be to like pick back up the momentum, go in the right direction, you know? And like it kind of essentially turns what would be an asset. Like an email list should be an asset for you. But if you have these people just sitting there for all this time, they're now essentially becoming more of like a liability or just like a depreciated asset at this point, because they're not really going to be reliable in the case of like if you want to go back to them and get them to order at some point, it's kind of like fighting an uphill battle, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I'm curious, like you work with so many of the fastest growing, I think also fastest moving. Like a lot of the brands you work with are usually the first to try things. Um, and you work with just real killers. And so I'm curious, like what patterns do they have that you learn from or you admire or you
Yeah. I mean,
recognize?
I could just tell you like straight up from the brands at the top, the reason they're at the top, the reason they get to the top faster than anybody is literally just speed of execution and the highest quality of like expectations for work, right? There's like, you can't get to a level of success of reaching $100 million a year if you don't try and test, at the highest velocity that you can, right? So if on the retention side, we almost approach it like CRO, where it's like, what kind of tests can we implement and track like month over month, week over week that are leading to improvements in retention? And that further only compounds with the more growth that comes in. It can only increase the speed of which we're obviously like collecting the results of these tests. And then, of course, now when they work, it just further then compounds that like you're now bringing in healthier new customer cohorts, right? And so I think like in working with these brands, there's just like a high level of like pressure and expectation to continue pushing the boundary because you don't get to the top without testing a ton of things and you don't stay at the top without, you know, continuing that, right? And like I feel like everybody plays this game of like copying each other, in ecom. Like you just see somebody doing it and you think it's like working. And it's just not the case. I could just tell you, like, I mean, this probably better than I do. Like, certainly there's elements you could take inspiration from some of these big like idol brands. But like a Grun's buy box is like a perfect example, right? Like I've tested the Grun's buy box across a number of brands and it's like not worked, right? So it's like maybe it just works for their audience, not going to work for you. So you have to get creative and it really requires having the right people in house or like through kind of agencies to give you that insight of like what might work. I mean, I think that's been the biggest thing. And then also just AI usage. Like again, the brands at the top are really kind of instilling this like mindset of like, you whatever you think you are in terms of like how fast you are, how good you are not using AI enough. And, you alone versus somebody who's maybe like 70% as good as you, but who knows how to use AI like 100 times better than you, they're going to beat you every single day of the week. Right. So if you could compound that
Totally.
across an entire company, across all of, employees, all of the contractors, whatever it might be, of just people who are savages using AI the right way, then now you've like drastically increased your output. You've drastically increased the level of like creativity and knowledge that now you have access to versus like the brands that are like, more agnostic or just are like, we'll get to it or we use it for like chat related questions. Like if you're just using AI right now for chat, like just like going to ask it a couple questions, which I do here and there, it's not really going to be nearly as useful as somebody who's like given their AI like a shit ton of context on the business and constantly feeds it that data. So it has that constant loop of like learning. Like the Cody example is fantastic. Like
Totally.
it's literally plugged into
Right.
all of his channels. So it knows the heat map data, it knows the Google Analytics data, it knows like everything it would need to know to give you really solid output. So I think like that's how brands at the top, obviously even Jones Road, they're huge now, are approaching this type of, approaching their work. So
Yeah, fully agreed. I think you're right. Speed of execution is something that I always see. And also like willingness to just try stuff, even if it's not like on brand or, you know, too polished or whatever, but just like going out and trying things. And the way that algorithms work and the way that the speed at which you can have feedback loops, like there's no reason to not test the whole volume of things and let the data decide, what to really narrow down to.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, wow, it's already been 45 minutes. Is there anything you want to finish on? Anything you want to make sure gets across, or like, as people are building out their retention businesses, maybe now starting to think about some of the things you mentioned that were really interesting, whether it's gifts on a delay, whether it's those 4 emails post purchase, whether it's, the, whatever it may be, like anything that comes
Yeah,
to
I mean,
mind.
I think ultimately it's just like, don't think of retention through a lens of like a single channel or two. Like retention is a very holistic function that touches so many different aspects of the business, for that matter, probably every aspect. Like we didn't even talk about customer service, but like customer service is can be a huge lever or a huge detriment to retention. We've seen it on on both ends, right? So basically, like let's say a subscriber reaches out to your brand and is like, I want to go cancel, right? The really friendly brands are like, okay, you're canceled, like just like that, right? And that compounds pretty significantly when you look at the retention data or the churn data. You can see churn by like admin, right? By like basically like a customer service agent, or churn by user. And so ideally the distribution of like churn events mostly comes from like a user churning on them on their own, rather than like a customer service agent like canceling for them. The reason for that is we can first collect like a reason for cancellation over customer support and provide a treatment, right? Like, respond back to the customer with empathy rather than just like a transactional related like macro. Like people hate when they know something's like a macro, I get it sometimes and I'm just like super pissed off. Not to say that you should like have all of your agents like handwrite every single message, but it's like maybe there's parts of the message or even just the first line of the message that's like, directly at that customer for that customer. And so we'll like collect the reason and then we'll give them sort of like a save offer through customer support. If they don't want it, then we're saying, okay, no worries. You can go cancel your subscription with our self-serve platform, our self-serve portal. Here's a link to go log in and do that on your own. And now we know that they have to go log in and to go through the entire cancellation prevention experience. So there's still a percent that we're going to save them there. So I just say, like, as a very quick tip, if you run a subscription brand, you definitely want that to be more so your strategy than just like quickly canceling somebody. Um, what
Yeah.
else? Product. I mean, like I think goes without saying, like if you don't have a good product, even though most founders are very biased that their product's amazing, I'm not here to say it's not, or your product's not good, but it's like, just primary example, working at Feastables when I was hired. I mean, they brought me in because retention was really bad, right? And retention for a chocolate brand will never be as high as retention for an AG1 or an IM8, right? Because like that's like a daily supplement versus like a chocolate bar. So you have to first understand there's like ceilings to retention that some brands, based on the category they're in, will just never have the same retention. And you just have to know that. But you can still reach the top level of that bar, right? Through like the right kind of work and the right strategy. So at Feastables, we learned that like only 3% of our audience cared about better for you chocolate, right? And that was probably the biggest unlock to retention we've ever discovered, where it led to a reformulation in the product where it was mostly now like milk chocolate based rather than like dark chocolate. And then we had like the full rebrand. And after doing that and putting in the time to do that, almost immediately the cohorts that were coming in were significantly higher in terms of retention and customer quality. We're seeing like over 100% increase in retention across like the first few months after their initial order. So product's huge. Don't discount that, and don't do these like shady tactics that force rebill people into a second order. If you want to, you can. I mean, you're definitely going to see higher retention on month 2, but you typically see a significant drop off on month 2 to month 3. So there's a lot better ways to do that stuff. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of it. I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to.
A lot of gold here. A lot of gold. Amazing. Well, thanks for coming on. How can people find you? Where can they email you or reach out if they want to, get in touch?
They could visit the website, boringecom.com. We call it boring ecom just because like retention is typically far more boring than growth, but it's the stuff that we love doing. You can find my LinkedIn, Joseph Siegel, find my Twitter, ecom at ecom _Joseph. Yeah, find me chatting online. Feel free to reach out and happy to help.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thanks,
Joseph.